All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the October 20, it is October. I was about to say November, October 2023 meeting of the Higher Ed Power BI User Group. Excuse me for tripping over my words there for a few minutes. So to any newcomers, welcome. Real quick, a recap of the mission of this user group is to train, educate, and connect data professionals who work with Microsoft Power BI at colleges and universities. This is only our second meeting. Our first meeting was just last month, and it seems to have gone pretty well. Glad to see so many people returning and maybe some new folks with us here as well. The vision for the future of this group is to continue to have monthly virtual meetings, as well as to orchestrate some in-person meetups at conferences like EDUCAUSE and AIR Forum and HEDW and so forth. So I'd like to encourage people, if this is your first time showing up, if you're an experienced Power BI user, or if you're a new user, whatever your situation is, wherever you come from, please consider active participation in the group. Volunteer to speak on a topic, ask questions during the meetings, collaborate with other institutions if you'd like to. We're talking about maybe doing some panels and so forth. Really encourage you to reach out to me, and I'll give you some links for how to do that towards the end of the meeting. But I really would like to see some heavy engagement from members of this group. So I tend to start these meetings with a quick cover of where we are with Power BI Service and Power BI Report Server, what versions we are on. So I'll start with Power BI Service in the cloud. The latest version is October 2023. It just came out in the last week. If you want to download the latest version of Power BI Desktop for the cloud, you can go to aka.ms/PBI single installer and download Power BI Desktop from there. The new features this month, there's a new panel inside of the model view in Power BI Desktop that is called the Model Explorer, which allows you to see sort of a hierarchical view of some of the different components of the semantic model in Power BI. So that's brand new. It's in public preview as of a week ago. And so if you're looking to explore the Model Explorer, go ahead and download the latest version of Power BI Desktop and try it out. The other thing I'm really excited about is that DAX calculation groups can now be authored inside of Power BI Desktop. Previously, this is a feature that was only available in Tabular Editor, which is an external tool for Power BI. But as of last week, we can now actually create calculation groups inside of Power BI Desktop. And I might actually do a demonstration of that in one of our next meetings, because calculation groups are very powerful. Power BI Report Server. If you are using the Report Server, the latest version is September of 2023. You can download the latest version of Power BI Desktop optimized for Report Server by going to aka.ms/PBI Report Server. It's a pretty underwhelming release for Power BI Report Server in September. The new features that we have are full screen view is now available. Yay! And it's like really kind of a tepid release. Not a whole lot going on. But then again, it's Power BI Report Server, so there's usually not a lot going on with it. And there have also been some improvements to the mobile layout editor. So if you're using Power BI Report Server, not a whole lot to talk about recently. Maybe we'll get some new stuff in the release this winter, but so far, not much to do. After the meeting, look out for an email from Meetup containing links to blog posts about the Power BI Service and Power BI Report Server releases. Also look for a link to our YouTube channel, which is where I will be sharing recordings of these meetings. The September recording from last month is live on the YouTube channel. So again, check your email later and I'll send that out. Also, I'll submit links to I'll send you links to forms so you can either submit an idea for a topic or a speaker, or for you to volunteer to speak at an upcoming meeting. We would love to have you, as I mentioned earlier. And also a link to RSVP for our next meeting, which is scheduled for November 15th. Speaking of topic ideas, just kind of off the cuff, some things that might be good for people to talk about if you're interested in volunteering to speak. Comparing Power BI Report Server on premises to the Power BI service in the cloud. If you are an organization that has a foot in both, or if you would like to partner up with an organization that specializes in one while you specialize in another, that would be a pretty good panel topic for one of our meetings. Just before this meeting, I was talking with our co-hosts about what are some ways that you connect to your institutional data. Are you connecting to Oracle databases, SQL Server, Snowflake, flat files, REST APIs? We could put together a panel that kind of walk through some of the different ways that higher education professionals working with Power BI connect to their institutional data sources. If that interests you, let me know. And then another suggestion we had recently was using Power BI for doing Likert scale analysis or other visualization scenarios. So we may have some people volunteer for that. If you have something similar that you would like to volunteer for, again, let me know. Send me your suggestions. Please volunteer. We would love to have active engagement from a lot of people in this user group. I'm going to open it up to announcements really quickly. This is just kind of an open mic, few minutes where you can take yourself off mute. And if you have an announcement you'd like to make, such as job postings or upcoming conferences and webinars, you have that opportunity to do so right now. So I'm just going to go to security and I'm going to allow people to unmute themselves just as soon as I can figure out how to do that. Sorry, so you can unmute yourself now if you have any announcements, so go ahead and go for it. Okay, not hearing any announcements, I will go on to the next slide, which is presentation time. So I am very fortunate to be joined today by several of our members, and they're going to talk about Power BI implementation at their institutions. One of the biggest pieces of feedback I got out of the September inaugural meeting was that there are so many institutions who are just getting started with Power BI, and they don't have a good idea of how other institutions are using this tool. Can we get perspectives from central IT? Can we get perspectives from institutional research? And so I was very lucky to get several volunteers to speak at this month's meeting. We've got, first of all, Doug Purnell from Elon University, which is just up the road from me here in North Carolina. We've got Jeff Cook from University of Miami, Teresa Waymeyer from Seward County Community College, and Amin Siegel from Austin College. And we're going to each go through and listen to some of their experiences, some of their wisdom working with Power BI, starting with Doug and ending with Amin. So at this point, I'll invite Doug to share his screen. I'm going to stop sharing mine, and we get to hear from him. Doug, you're good to go.
Great. Let me get this all set up. Okay, how does that look?
Looks good on my end.
Okay, great. Hello, I'm Doug Purnell, Elon University. I'm a database architect, and I'm going to give you sort of our journey, how we started with SQL Server reporting services all the way to the Power BI service that Ben's discussed already. So with that, I'm going to stop my video just to give more screen time, but we'll see how this goes. So SSRS. So this was our first sort of entry into reporting. Some of you may remember Crystal Reports. Luckily, SSRS is included with SQL Server. There's a lot of products within the box products, so it was nice. And we spun up an instance of SSRS, and we started playing with reports. There's a nice report builder application you can use to build reports. You can also use Visual Studio with some extensions. We do some custom application development here at Elon, and so our developers were able to use some of the web services and actually embed SSRS reports within the custom applications, which made the application experience a lot easier for the end users instead of linking out to a separate website. And with everything around SSRS, around data security, we're able to use AD groups to control access. So within SSRS, you can create folders, and with those folders inside, you can embed the reports. And so we created groups for all those, and then the data sources, we had separate little service accounts. So we didn't have to worry about giving individual users access to the databases. We use service accounts, so they wouldn't have to we wouldn't have to worry about them using some other tools to gain access to the data. So that was sort of our entry into reporting. And it worked really well because you could use ODBC drivers to connect to virtually any data source on our campus. So it was nice. And we used that for a number of years. And sort of what this looks like behind the scenes, some more of a technical nature in my job, is you'll have the sort of the data tier where there's two databases that SSRS is required to use. So you can host these on any instance of SQL Server. You don't have to spin up a separate instance of SQL Server for these databases. And then you have your database, your data sources, whatever those might be. And then this middle tier is where all the real engine is for SSRS. And really, you don't have to worry about this layer per se, other than making sure that your data is secure. And most of the users will use the web browser to access the data source. So it's real easy for them to access. And just to show you what that looks like, so this is our SSRS instance. And you can see here we have different folders, and inside different folders, you notice we have our data sources organized by different server names, so we can keep up with those. You'll notice we have test out here as well. So we try to keep things organized by production and test. And then inside of these, there may be subfolders that we can organize different departments by. And this is just a report and click kind of interface for reporting. So it's real easy to use with end users. So they can just browse when they need to. Or some users don't even go to the SSRS website. They just use everything through the application that they're using. So it's nice. And Ben, let me know if there's any questions. I don't have my eyes on the chat, so now's a good time if there's any specific questions around SSRS.
No questions yet, Doug.
Okay.
We've just had some announcements about some upcoming virtual conferences.
Okay,
so
great.
Keep rolling.
Great. Okay, so we had SSRS for a while, and then Microsoft released their Power BI report server that Ben mentioned earlier. And this was first released back in 2017. And it allowed you to build Power BI reports on premises without the need of putting your data up in the cloud. Because 2017 was early in the sort of the cloud journey, and a lot of companies didn't quite understand data security and who would have access to my data. And so they just felt more comfortable starting on premises. So this is a great entry point. And the same thing for us. We didn't have any dedicated report builders, so we all learned internally. Ben mentioned this in the first meeting last month, but one of the nice things about the Power BI report server is when you build your reports, the data set's sort of embedded within the report itself. The downside is you can't share data sources like you can with SSRS and ultimately Power BI, but with Power BI report server, each report has its data source embedded. So that was easy for us to sort of secure the report and the data by itself, and we could create folders as well. For us, like I said, without any Power BI developers, this was a great first step. As Ben mentioned, there is a special Power BI desktop you have to use specifically for Power BI report server. The features are a few months behind. For example, the calculated groups may or may not make it into Power BI report server. It's entirely up to Microsoft which tools and which features they bring down to the on-premises version. And Ben mentioned this, the latest release was in September, and we applied our update actually this week. And it's a very easy process like any other Microsoft update. So the nice part about Power BI report server is it lets you host SSRS and Power BI reports within the same user interface. And so what that looks like is if I switch over, move this out of the way. So this is our Power BI report server, and it looks very similar. And if you come into any one of these folders, it will organize the Power BI reports up top. And if we had any SSRS reports, they would appear down below. So it's an easy way to combine some of your reports into one environment. We still use SSRS today, and we still use Power BI Report Server today. Different applications use Power BI Report Server, and some of the legacy apps still point to SSRS. There really wasn't a big business need to move the SSRS reports into Power BI Report Server yet. We're sort of waiting for the business to sort of dictate that. But the nice part with these is you can, with some of these reports, it's just like having Power BI, and you can just, load it. It will load the data from your local source. There's no cloud. You just point to the data source, and you can put in visualizations and whatever it might be. So this is some of the information, for this particular report. So it's it makes it nice. So that's Power BI Report Server. So what it looks like behind the scenes from a technical standpoint is you still have the report author. They're using the Power BI special desktop client to build the reports. You do have an instance of Power BI Report Server. It's similar to SSRS in the sense that it does have some databases behind the scenes, the same two databases. Those don't have to be on the same machine. They can be hosted somewhere else. And then end users will simply hit your report server web address. It also has web interface for your custom applications if you want to embed them into your application. So it's really nice. So it's a good tool. We started seeing a need to get more into the true Power BI service just because of the way Power BI Report Server was lagging behind. And so we actually hired a full-time Power BI developer back in the summer of 2019. And that's really what catapults us into the Power BI service. So this is a service hosted within the Microsoft Azure ecosystem. And it started way back in 2013, back in some of the Excel products, for those of you that remember. And it's matured over the years. The nice part is it's a free product. Those of you who used Tableau in the past, I don't know what it is today, but in the past, Tableau used to cost money for the desktop, but this was a free entry point. But where they sort of get you is when you want to start sharing them via a website. That's where the Power BI Report Pro license comes in. Now, I'm not a license expert, so please consult your Microsoft reseller. But this is where you start getting into some licensing issues. Luckily for us, we have A5 licenses for all faculty and staff. And so we can publish reports into the Power BI service, and then we can share those out through what's called applications in Power BI, and it makes it really easy. We didn't want to use direct query. So with Power BI service, you have to figure out, where am I going to get my data from? You can report directly off of cloud databases. So if you have some Azure databases or AWS databases, or some of your custom applications have hosted databases, you could use direct query and run live queries against a production database. In our case, we didn't want to do that just because we'd have to open up some holes into our network. So the nice part is Microsoft offers an Azure data gateway or a Power BI data gateway. And this sits on your network, and it listens for requests and then sends data up to the Power BI service. So you don't have to worry about opening any holes, and it's real easy, and it allows you to do scheduled refreshes. So all in all, it's a nice experience. One thing you want to keep in mind with your Power BI service is making sure that you're using, unless you're on a capacity premium license, you're sharing resources with other companies in the same data center. So if you go do a scheduled refresh, you may not get a refresh at that exact moment in time. It may get queued up, especially around 8 o'clock in the morning when everyone's trying to refresh the report. So just keep in mind you're sharing resources. Paginated reports used to be a premium feature. Luckily, about, I guess, 9 to 12 months ago, they offered that now. So it's just part of the pro license. So you could take some of your SSRS reports and move them all into Power BI service if you wanted to. And like I said, if you do choose to do capacity through premium for a cost, you own your own resources. So you don't have to worry about sharing any resources with anybody else. And really all this was made possible by our first Power BI developer that we hired, Mary Hagee. And she was very instrumental in helping us understand, how Power BI works, the reporting, the data gateway, and a lot of the cool visualizations you can do. So that pretty much sums up our journey. Any questions, Ben?
Yeah, so we've got one from Melinda Higgins. Is there a separate cost to get Power BI report server if you already have SSRS and a 2019 report server with paginated reports?
So as far as I understand, if you have SQL Server Software Assurance or Power BI Premium, you are granted a license for Power BI Report Server instance. But please check with your Microsoft rep. That is what I believe is the current licensing, unless you want to go outright and buy it specifically.
Yeah, I think Davidson, I think we have the software assurance package. We ended up getting a few Power BI Pro licenses, but we are very similar to Elon. We kind of put most of our initial work into Power BI report server. We're starting to phase off of that at this point. I actually had a question. Has Elon thought about upgrading to Power BI Premium capacity from the user-based Pro licenses?
We did a few years back. I think there's some good educational discounts compared to the list price of some of the prices I've heard. But recently, with the announcement of Microsoft Fabric, we're trying to figure out what our next steps are going to be. So we're waiting for Fabric to become GA and see which features are included in the GA product. Then we'll make a determination. To be honest, we've had very good success with the Pro licenses and sharing resources in the data center. We haven't had any, refreshes take an hour, for example, because of limited resources. It's usually most 10 minutes.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
We've got a question from Scott Cook. Hey, Scott, do you make any of these dashboards available outside of your organization?
Today, we do not. That is a feature of Power BI service. You can do some things on your website, but we haven't done. Everything right now is all done on our network. Now, just to clarify that, so Power BI service doesn't require you to be on our network. So you can be at home and access the reports. It's all done through Active Directory authentication. But if you want to access Power BI report server or SSRS, you have to either VPN into the network or be on campus. So that is one of the nice things about Power BI service is you can access these reports. We just don't do it through the website currently for any public, like our fact book, for example. Yeah. It's produced differently, not through Power BI.
Yeah. Just from Davidson's perspective, we actually have a public fact book that's in Power BI. You can share that publicly. And actually, I think I've already shared that with Scott because I just met with him the other day. Lynette Duncan asks, at Elon, is this entirely housed in IT or does the IR office have the ability to build reports?
Yes, so this started in IT and it's probably 75% IT today. We're lucky that one of our IT employees moved over to IR about 5 years ago, and she's been using SAS, and recently she's been building her own Power BI reports within Power BI service, and that's been a great asset to us, just because we can only build so much with limited resources, and so she's been able to take a lot of the data from IR and build her own reports for her business partners. And it's been a great team effort. So that's been great. And we would love to have other Power BI users, like pro users out there, to build their own reports as well. I think it's great collaborating with other business partners and going, because they'll know the needs for their reporting better than we will. And as long as they have access to the data sources, they can build their own reports and be more self-sufficient.
Last question we have is from Kim Berlin. How much data do you refresh every day, and what is the largest table and how many tables?
Okay, so we refresh our data sets in Power BI service every single night, and some up to 8 times a day, I think is the limit for Power BI Pro license, unless you do premium. So we're refreshing those all the time. Most are just once a day. Others, with the nature of the data, it's like I said, every 2 to 3 hours. Some of the data models within Power BI service have most have 5, some have up to 10, and it's let me see how many. I know we have one data set that is over 10 megabytes. Am I saying that right? Or is it gigabytes then, or what's the limit on the? I forgot what
So
the limit
under,
on data set. 100. Anyways, there's a limit with the data set, wherever the number is, and after that
yeah,
limit, you have to use Power BI Premium per user. So
yeah,
our accounting data set is rather large, as you can imagine, all the individual debits and credits that we have built in there. And so we had to actually purchase Power BI Premium per user. So there's roughly 10 people today that have access to that specific data set and reporting environment. And so that refreshes once a night. It only takes 15 minutes to refresh, and it's hundreds of thousands of rows. And so it does fairly well. If you have any, I guess, particular questions more on that, I'm happy to talk with you more. And I think I'll share my email. Ben has my email address, so we can share it out to the team.
yeah. So I think the limit on Power BI Pro is 10 gigabytes per
Okay.
model. I think
Yeah.
on premium, it's somewhere north of 200 gigabytes.
Yeah.
Power BI data models can store a lot of data. I mean, millions, even billions of rows. Obviously there are performance trade-offs with all of that and refresh trade-offs, but it's pretty good storage, especially considering a lot of the magic behind Power BI is the compression that happens in those data
Mm-hmm.
sets. That's what enables Power BI to have such awesome performance against data sets that are just absolutely massive in terms of size. So, Doug, thank you very much. I think this is a
Yeah.
really good illustration of one institution's journey, starting at SSRS, going through Power BI Report Server, and starting to put more footprint up in the cloud, and a good technical overview. At this point, I want to turn it over to Jeff Cook at University of Miami to talk about his institution's perspective.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Thanks, Pete. Let me go here. I'll start the presentation. Okay. So you can see here, it's a Power BI Pro and Direct Query, a match made in heaven. It's a question mark because I think we're still on this journey. So I wanted to walk everybody through really where is right now and share briefly where we want to go and how we're going to get there. And along the way, we're going to talk about some of the complications that we have internally here. So just to give you a little bit of background here, my background was traditionally in Tableau, and up around 2 years ago, I started getting more involved with Power BI, and then I actually started at the University of Miami in March of last year. And the University of Miami, while we do have Tableau desktop and we're using a Tableau server, the enterprise tool that we use is Power BI. So that's really when I started to, I guess, dive in to Power BI a lot more than any other platform there. So that's my background here. Also, before I move on, the University of Miami, prior to having Power BI, it's a relatively recent tool that they started using. They had, of course, SSRS. We have Microsoft SQL Server underneath the hood for our database layer. But before that, they had Oracle Business Intelligence Enterprise, OBIEE, OBI, right? So they had OBI. And so they moved to Power BI. And so we're still learning and we're still improving with everything in Power BI. All right, so direct query here, I think, is the most important thing to bring up. So Doug, you mentioned that you looked at direct query and essentially chose not to use it. We'd love to have that option. However, next slide. At the University of Miami, we have what I would call a robust security process that stores all of the row level security at the database layer for our enterprise. And so what's great about this is it makes our, data tool agnostic. We don't necessarily have to store our data in a particular tool or have the security rules stored within the different software. So we could use Tableau, we can use, Click, we could use Power BI, we could use whatever we'd like. However, the one trade-off with that is if we are publishing a report, we have to publish it to the service that is going out to the enterprise, and it has to be direct query, because when the query runs in the backend, it checks whether or not the user who's accessing that has access to see the data. All right. So here on this slide, we have a little, just a Power BI report builder output. That's my internal username right here. And you can see what layers we have the RLS, or the row level security, built in on the data layer. So you can see we have careers, what they're called. I have access to all schools. These are all the careers. I have access to pretty much everything, right? Because, as my role, we need to see all the data. We're developing the reports and we need to see it. But if you logged in, or you wanted to see somebody else's access, they could potentially have no here listed for student finance, or confidential flags, or specific careers or schools. For instance, a dean, if a dean were to log into our Power BI report service and want to look at a report on retention rate, they would only see their school, right? So that's how this works. And this is largely driven from our student information system. So the student information system stores all this data and all this information. Those rules are passed to the database, and then we direct query with that. So when we use import storage mode, it bypasses all of that security, which, again, I love performance. I love efficiency. I'd love to use import storage mode more often. However, I think our auditors would have a conniption if we went ahead and just chose to bypass all of our security within our data. So we must use direct query storage mode. And I have a little asterisk there. Some of you may ask, well, is all of your data in the data warehouse? Well, of course not. We don't have literally everything in the data warehouse. So if we want to build reports that are sourced from, say, Excel or other areas that still have confidential information in it, we built a workspace within Power BI that we termed it, miscellaneous reports. And we actually built an app in there, so that the app that you can create within each workspace, and we have specific audiences where we store and surface those reports within that app right there. So that's how we sort of get around that, because we do want our users to engage with Power BI. We want them to engage with the service. We want them to engage with, we're transitioning from SSRS, but anything with Power BI Report Builder, we want them to think of that as their home for all the data that they need to make any decision. And so we don't want to send as many, Excel reports. We'd rather surface that as a Power BI report within that app I just mentioned. So we must use direct query. All right. So when I got on board, I said, okay, this is going to be fun, because we're going to have a lot of limitations when it comes to performance on reports. That's the biggest concern I have, is the performance that we have on reports, especially if we want to have longitudinal data, right? If you keep adding to that data set, it's going to bog down. And so what we ended up doing was an internal project that we're phrasing is, it's called SAS to SQL. We can explain more. If anybody wants to contact me after this presentation, more than happy to walk through our experience in more detailed terms. But we started doing this project that really looks at what reports we have, or what data we need comprehensively, and then we're building data models off of it. So let me go to the next slide. And you'll see up here, I forgot to even mention our name, URSA. So we're part of the Institutional Research and Strategic Analytics team. It's URSA. And so what we ended up doing was we looked at our data. All right, what do we have? What scripts do we have against the data warehouse? What do we need to build a report, and how should we get there? And we started, like I said, building these data models. And this is just sort of a conceptual data model that we just put up here is to explain. And I'm going to walk you through later actual data models we built. But we started building these data models from the conceptual layer to see, what do we need? What fields should be in there? How are we going to relate them in the back end, right, in Power BI, to surface them and make sure that it's performant. So you'll see here, let's say we wanted a student demographics view in the database layer. Well, we could build that. We could build it with SQL, obviously, but then it's important that it's direct query. So we are building these views based on the tables and the views that we need to build on that have the row level security already built in. So each one of these, this is how they'll relate. This is how it goes. It's important to me and really the entire team that we build these data models. It's a lot of work. I'm not going to, say it's automated and it's very efficient. It is a lot of work, but it's important for us to understand, what we're doing. How are we going to be relating these different entities to each other? And do we really need to have a field here when it's represented somewhere else? Can't we just join? So we're really creating these data models to help us, but also to help our users. And we plan to surface these with our users a little later on. So this is part of that project. We have do's and don'ts, and I put a couple here. So yes, do create SQL Server objects, right? If that's a view, great. If that's a function, great. Stored procedure, whatever it is, we're a big fan of standardization. Prior to doing this, we had a lot of, in pretty much every report that we had that wasn't going against our analysis services server in the cube was a custom SQL. It's a custom SQL script to where, okay, we had a report showing retention here, a report showing completion rates, but it was very hard to maintain and have any governance around that. So the first thing we set out to do was create these SQL Server objects to create a standardized definition of different metrics and terms that we use across all the reports. Otherwise, I don't know about you all, but it's really crazy to go into every report we have and try to determine, okay, what is the definition that we had here? Do we need to update the case statement for, race ethnicity for iPads potentially? We'd have to remember where those were. So now when we create these views, we can go in and just change it one place and it propagates all to the other reports that we have on the service. So again, another do is maintain and document data models. And then the last do, the last checkbox we have right there is performance test. So I mentioned it's direct query, right? So Pete mentioned earlier that, hey, the engine behind Power BI is really great at compression. And yes, again, would love to do that. But since we have to use direct query, we have to get a little more creative when it comes to some of this performance testing, where a 20-second or 40-second, 1-minute data load time on the back end for a refresh and a data model on the service might be great for import storage mode. Really, it's terrible for direct query, because when you're changing a slicer and it takes a minute to load every single time, oh boy, do we get feedback from our users that they do not like that. So, and I don't like it either. So we really have to get creative. So that's really the impetus behind going the extra step and understanding, okay, what do we really need here? We're trying to be uber efficient with what we have. And so then we have the don'ts, the corresponding don'ts. Don't create a giant custom SQL query and then import them, or just don't create a giant custom SQL query if you can avoid it either. So we would have some SQL queries that were many records, which I don't really have an issue with the number of records. I had an issue with the number of columns that we would bring in, right? Very wide and very deep. And of course, that would take a long time. And then the second don't we have is do not push to production without validation. So validation isn't just accuracy and performance. It's looking at, have we explored all possible avenues of creativity behind this script that we're looking at. So there's been some SQL training, I think, for our team as well. We're trying to become experts in everything that we're doing here, so that way we can just really give our institution a better product and give ourselves a little better product when it comes to efficiency. So here's an example. So this is, and I'll show you a real, I think on the next slide, I'll show you the actual example here. There was a report that a user came to us and said, hey, this is taking a long time to run. Previously, it wasn't taking a long time, but it is now. So, we looked into it, and the data source was just a custom SQL query, just one big SQL query. And you said, okay, well, there's an issue there. So after looking at the query and really refactoring a little bit, we ended up on two tables. So in the data model view, in the back end of Power BI desktop, we had two tables there where we were relating them. Great, that got us down to 45 seconds. I said, okay, not good enough. 45 seconds each time you change a visual, each time you change something. I mean, that's crazy to me. When you have to wait 45 seconds, it doesn't get people to interact with the data. And instead, it really forces them to say, hey, can you just give me the data? And we end up doing ad hoc requests. So we refactored it again, and right now it's at 15 seconds. And honestly, I don't know, without dramatic changes to our database and creating new schemas, might not get below that 15 seconds. That's 15 seconds is conservative. Sometimes it goes in 5. I think Doug mentioned this earlier. We are on the Power BI service, Power BI Pro. So depending on resources available and how that latency is on the Power BI service, sometimes that 5 seconds could be 15. So it's between 5 and 15 seconds now. We're really happy about that, like a 16x performance increase. And all it took was some TLC with our SQL. Okay, so what I mean by that is something really simple. We took this main population script used to be that one giant custom SQL. Okay, of course it's not that anymore. So we have what we call one-liners, and in the context of the script, one-liners does make sense. For you, it probably doesn't, but it does if you look at the script. Then we had post-fall GPA right there. So that's a program we have internally as well. So we just related all 3 of these, or all these 2, back to our main population on person ID. So this isn't necessarily a star schema for those that are into that sort of thing. It's just we're relating. But honestly, that's all it took, is it took us understanding that, hey, we don't need to have everything in one query. One query isn't really great all the time. Separate it out, and that's an alternative approach that we can make to delivering our Power BI reports. All right, so that's what we did for that. I'm going to walk you through a couple data models that we actually have built briefly, and I think there's somebody on the call that had a big hand in that, Jen Heaton. She posted in the chat earlier. So Jen, give yourself a pat on the back. I'm going to start off with our enrollment data model. Zoom in. We built these in Visio. And really the point of this is to look at what we currently have for our official, what we call official reporting, and our official reports are official data that's done at Benchmark, and bring that to the database layer. We want to have everything in the data warehouse, written in SQL, surfaced through views in Power BI. And so we've done some conceptual data modeling work here, gone into our general enrollment data model. So this is general. We just want to see everything related to enrollment. And so you can see here, without getting into every single one, this is where they're joined. These are the fields that we need. These are the foreign keys that we're going to have. This is really, data architecture. I think some folks on the team had more fun with it than others. I love this sort of thing because, in my opinion, it allows folks to understand, what we're doing here. It's this visual component that maybe if you don't understand SQL, you can understand this. They're related and how things are brought in. So there's that. And then there's another version here for student admissions as well. We broke these down into different categories. And admissions, you can see here, if it's a calculated field, we have a little symbol here. It's showing, hey, this is a calculated field. You can go to this page. Let me see if this works. Live demo. Yeah. So calculated fields. And here's the actual script behind that calculated field on the data model. Full disclosure, yes, this is a lot more documentation. This was not part of our original plan when we set out to do this. But our wonderful analyst on the team said, hey, this would be a great idea if we could do that. And they set out and they started doing it. And I'm certainly not going to stop them from doing this, because this is wonderful that everything's within this package. Right here, we can see the logic for this calculated or derived term. So I'll go back to this. And then another thing we just want to point out as well, so we can go through the data models, nerd out and have fun with that. But we also store all of our scripts on our Azure DevOps service. So let me go here. We use Azure DevOps and its Git component to really track and all the pull requests and go through code review with everybody. So we store that on DevOps, and you have the links here within the data models as well. So folks can go to the actual SQL scripts if they'd like to, too. Okay. So again, that's pretty much all I had to share without getting into. I'd love to walk through detailed reports or any of the other offerings that we have outside of this forum, because there are some confidential information that we'd be sharing. But if anybody's interested, I can link up after this call at some point and we can walk you through that. But otherwise, that's what we're doing. We have to use direct query, so we're trying to get creative with it, and we're utilizing our brain to create SQL Server objects to make things more efficient, and really trying to maximize the star schema approach within the back end of Power BI. Okay. Any questions from anybody?
Great stuff. We do have one question from Lucy Walker. She wants to know what student information system University of Miami is using.
It is PeopleSoft, Oracle-based database that we use.
All right. So Hillary Carter at UAB says she'd love to know more about how we're using Azure DevOps and Git. We could probably do a whole meeting around how to use Azure DevOps and Git with
Love
Power
to.
BI. Yeah, like and that's actually a fairly, there's always been some capability to use those tools together with Power BI, but just recently with Microsoft Fabric, there's been a huge innovation in how to couple Power BI and Azure DevOps. There's also been the release of a feature called Power BI Projects, which allows you to take your Power BI report from Power BI Desktop and actually sort of decompose it into a format that is suitable for using with Git. So I think that we're going to probably put that one on the agenda for a future meeting, because that's, it's still pretty new for Power BI. And it's actually been sort of a sore point for a lot of Power BI developers, is that for years, it was really tough to use any kind of version control system with Power BI. But just in the last 6 to 12 months, it's gotten a lot better. So more to come on that probably. Jeff, I'm going to move on in the interest of time, but thanks. This was a really great overview of what I consider to be a very mature implementation, a lot of Power BI best practices, especially consolidating your business logic as far upstream as you can at the SQL Server layer, instead of having Power BI do a lot of that heavy lifting. Not everyone's able to take that approach necessarily, but that's a good example of kind of best practices, I think, in the world of Power BI. I do have a question from Kimberlyn. If you use a view in SQL Server as the backend object, can you use it to create filters in a dashboard that can be sorted and filtered like a subset of the overall view? Yes, you can, especially if you're using direct query and you've got it parameterized. You can actually bind slicers in your Power BI report to filters in Power Query. So it would be just like writing a SQL query that says, select star from this view where column A equals X. So you definitely can do that. I'm going to turn it over now to Teresa Waymeyer at Seward County Community College to get her portion started. Teresa, you ready to go?
Yep, just let me get everything staged up here.
All right.
While I'm bringing up my pivot or my PowerPoint, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Teresa Waymeyer, and I am the data analyst at Seward County Community College, which is a very small college in Southwest Kansas. We're classified as rural for sure. Can everybody see my slide?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And we our Power BI Pro license, our team for the development of Power BI is me. So in this case, there is an I in team because I'm it. There is nobody else that really has taken an interest in the solution or has the technical skills to really get into the under the hood and play with it. However, I am at a very remedial level after listening to the first two presentations. So bear with me as I go through my very remedial presentations. We connect different ways for our data source. We are a banner institution, SIS, and we connect a lot of direct queries to our Oracle database. And that's because we have a president and likes to see enrollment numbers, every 5 minutes. So live information for him is often something that we have to be providing pretty regularly. So we do have Oracle database connections via ODBC. That was the one I just talked about. We also do web connections via URL. And we also I do a lot of folder connections like the one that you see here on this screen. And that is because I have found that with our limited budget for data warehouses, this is the easiest way for me to create a little warehouse and pull that information into Power BI and look at the information longitudinally. And so that leads me to the first Power BI report that I'm going to talk about. And that is a piece of information that I was not really actually very familiar with the data. And we use a solution called Evaluation Toolkit to evaluate our courses through our Canvas learning management system. However, I was not a part of that at all until about 2 months ago when I was approached and asked to provide them longitudinal data. And when I went in to look at it, there were several challenges I discovered, and that was that the data is collected individual files by semester and by multiple departments. So every department had their own file, and it was all over the place. It was helter-skelter, quite frankly. And so those files that you see there are each file I had to identify exactly what it was so I could look at it and know when it was collected and what department and what's, everything. So basically what I decided to do based on that knowledge and that information was I downloaded the files into a single folder, and that's how I connected it and pulled that data into Power BI. So that was my first decision, was how do I get it in there? And that was the only way I could figure out to smoothly do it. Having said all that, now I know that I can just dump the next semester's files into this folder and refresh my Power BI and my data is ready. So that's the benefit. Then I had to model it, and I always do things the hard way. So I started at the fun part, trying to put this all together and make it look pretty. And then I realized, oh my gosh, there's so many barriers here. And the first barrier I found out was that all of the results, whether they be a scaled score of 1 to 5 or a open-ended question response, they are all stored in a single column. So I had to develop some way of isolating those questions out so that I could filter them by page and show just what I wanted them to see as far as a Likert scale or a yes/no question, and obviously then the open-ended questions. So I had to build this little scale score just to do that and map those questions so that I would know which was which. Once I got that done, then I was able to visualize it. But one of the first things I really had to do before I could get into what they really wanted to see was the Likert scale. But I had to do something to really make sure, for one, that my data was returning what I expected it to, and also to get an overview of how the survey was actually performing. We had some suspicions for a long time that the information was not being, the survey was not being delivered correctly, in my opinion. It was being delivered to too many people. We were over surveying, and our response rate, as you can see on this stats chart, dwindled to nothing. That's the orange line on that chart. I knew that was happening, but I had no way of proving it until I did this analysis on this data. And that was an important concept, because before, nobody was going to listen to me if I kept telling them that they were over surveying. But when I was able to present this statistical analysis and say, look, here's what you're doing, and here's your response rate, and it's getting worse. So you're going to have to rethink how you're actually delivering and administering that survey every semester. And by seeing this, I know that they have now bought into that change in their concept. So and then, of course, I went ahead and used the open-ended response questions to just kind of do a word cloud and identify. It was actually, that was the fun piece, because I didn't know that the word cloud was in there, and I found it and stumbled on it. And it actually lets you filter out a lot of the thes and ands and, that kind of stuff, or stuff that's related directly to the question. So I was able to filter it out quite a bit and get it down to just the most important concepts in the open-ended responses. And then, of course, I did the Likert scale, which is, I basically modeled it right on the semester reports that were provided in the tool. But I was able to combine all of the semesters and all of the programs into a single result for all of the questions. So that was my final piece for that, was the Likert scale. I haven't finished everything. I've still got a few things to do. My next steps are I haven't got it isolated so that you can look across the screen and see the academic years and the performance per academic year and or per semester. I'll do that, but they wanted this right away, and this was enough to get them by so that they were able to make some decisions. I do want to combine the Likert scales for fewer responses, so we can combine the agree and strongly agree versus the disagree and strongly disagree, and identify those that, in a better, a more succinct content for consuming it by our administration. That being said, with my process, I was able to come back to them and recommend, even though I was able to come back to them and recommend reducing surveys conducted per semester based on the actual data, which is the important reason for collecting that data, is to know those things, and continue to monitor the responses over time. So we'll keep watching this, and if they make any changes to how they're collecting those responses, I should know within a year whether or not it's been effective. I put a handy tip out here, and I can share this information with anybody that wants it. This is one of my favorite methods of connecting to data. I was trying to figure out how to make it easier to actually analyze Microsoft form results. And I fussed with it and tried to figure it out, and I never could figure it out. And I finally found a YouTube video. There's actually several, but that one YouTube video by the guy in a cube was what I found to be the most effective for getting what I needed to into those from those forms into Power BI, so I could actually do some further analysis on those surveys and quizzes. So, and finally, I'll go ahead and briefly show you what I have developed. This is a public page. I look at it and cringe. It was one of the first things I did, but I actually built a single view in Oracle, and so somebody was asking about filtering. Everything in here is filtering off of a single view. Okay, so I was able to build this. Basically, it shows our schedule for each semester. It's updated twice a day. It's refreshed twice a day. Automatically, I have it refreshed. And I'm able to go in and filter it by just about anything. Right now, we're only showing what's available right now for course enrollment, but they can filter it. They can connect to the actual course description in our student information system. They can filter it by a program. They can even filter it by an instructor if they wish to. They can filter it by how it's delivered online, whatever. We also are part of a Kansas system-wide transfer courses, and you can isolate that to just courses that will transfer across the state. So that's one of the few things I've done that were, I didn't realize it was important until the refresh broke. And when it broke, I found out that, yeah, everybody was looking at it. So this is an enrollment dashboard. This is refreshed 3 times a day because our president likes to watch that number. I could probably just put this right here on the screen, and that's all he really looks at. I really believe that. But it is something that we are driven to attempt to achieve, and it's part of our wildly important goal for this year. And so I built this dashboard so that he can get in here at any time and take a look and see where we're at. Now, I did find out not long after I built it that he kept going in here and hitting refresh, trying to see it change. And I said, dude, it refreshes 3 times a day and I schedule it. So you're not going to see it change until it hits that refresh time. So he didn't know that until then. So I kind of had to laugh at him. We do build a couple of different models so that people can see it in different ways. This is just so succinctly defining our goal and where we're at to meet that goal. I also provide some information for our business and industry programs that are non-credit, so that they can get in here and see what types of services they're providing to the community. I've also built some program summary page, as well as a program heat map, which our administration for some reason really loves. So whatever, I'm all for making them happy. So that's what we do. This is just a static file in a folder. Every year I go out and collect the iPads results for full and part-time retention rates. And I do the same thing with graduation rates, but it's the same information. So this is a pretty rudimentary design, but it tells the story, and we're able to compare ourselves to regional and state peers. So that's something that we like to look at when we're making decisions for goal setting. And finally, this is my last one. This one is actually, the data is collected by the, in a spreadsheet in SharePoint. And so I'm connecting this through the web to an Excel spreadsheet. And so anybody can go in and put in results for their strategic direction anytime they want, and then I can just refresh this when I know that it's happened. I don't refresh it automatically because it doesn't change that often. So I just go in and refresh it when I know there's more data out there. So, but this was just a dashboard that we created, so, or a scorecard that we created, so we can kind of see our progress based on our strategies, the timeline that we've planned for something, and the different directions that we're wanting to take. As you can see, we've got somebody that hasn't participated very well because they haven't put their data in, but that's how it works. So, and I blatantly copied this off of somebody's site. So, that's pretty much it, unless somebody has questions that I didn't cover.
Yeah, let me go through some of the comments. We've got one from Joe Bradley. He just said, we use Evaluation Kit as well. He mentions there's an API that may help with eliminating the spreadsheet download, and he would be happy to provide further detail on that if you're interested.
Interested.
Yeah. Kunal Patel is asking, does the chat in Teams in the toolbar allow you to discuss this dashboard via Microsoft Teams? If so, that's great, as we have a hard time finding a way to collaborate. So yeah, Kunal, there is a feature now. Power BI has a pretty strong integration with Microsoft Teams and with Microsoft PowerPoint. You can have live Power BI reports embedded in your PowerPoint decks. And you can also have live Power BI dashboards embedded in Microsoft Teams. So you can have I can't remember if they're called workspaces or channels or what inside of Teams, but you can have it inside of Teams and you can interact with it inside of Teams and make comments, which is a pretty cool feature. I wish Slack had that. And then another question from Lucy Walker. Teresa, did you say some of your reports are publicly available on a website? And if so, how did you do that?
Okay, so I won't do that with this one, but I can show you how you do it. This is one that I built, so I have got access to it, right? And so I am on the physical Power BI cloud site right now, and I can go into let's see, file and embed report and publish to web. Okay, once you publish it to the web, it is there for anybody to see. So when you're publishing it, you have to be completely aware of the data behind that, because if you publish private information, I am very, very careful about what I publish to the web. Everything I publish to the web is publicly available anyway. I'm just sending it in a different way, but that is how you would do it. You would literally just publish it to the web like that.
Excellent. All right, well,
fairly
thank you, Teresa. I think these were some great examples of, what you can actually build with Power BI. We talked a lot about earlier in this meeting, sort of the architecture and the overall ecosystem of Power BI, but you actually took us to where the rubber meets the road, and that's really, really appreciated.
Unfortunately, that's the only way I know how to do it. I have not done the good job of documenting my processes. I'm usually switching hats before I can get that done. So
It's all right. All right, so now I'm going to turn it over to Amin Seagull at Austin College. He's going to finish us out with his talk on their Power BI implementation.
Thanks, Pete. You guys hear me okay?
Yeah, we sure can.
And I'm going to go ahead and stop Teresa's screen, and I'll pull up my small screen here. So what I wanted to do actually was not talk about sort of overall what we have built, but just one very specific thing. Let me start by, Pete, thank you. Thank you for setting this group up. Thank you for making these opportunities available. Austin College, in case anybody doesn't know, we're north of Austin. We're 4 hours north of Austin. We're actually north of Dallas. We are almost in Oklahoma. So if you wanted to fly out, don't go to Austin. We are in this year, we're going to be celebrating our 175th year, which is fantastic. So real quick, the journey that I had. Now, Teresa, you used the word remedial. I mean, of course, it's pish posh, right? No way should you say that. What you've done is marvelous. A lot of us, it's what is the situation that you're in on this call? There's 50, 60, 70 people, and there's probably 50, 60, 70 different situations, right? I mean, you may have this strong IT support. You may have, an SSRS implementation, or you may not. And you may be doing this on your own. You may be the one person like Teresa is that's carrying this thing forward. And that's kind of when I got here in January of 2020, that was the situation. There was no place to publish reports. There was nothing that was already built. So in spring of that year, our IT director forwarded a note from one of our consortia that Microsoft would sell Power BI Pro licenses. I don't know what it is. It's between $2 and $3 a month. And if you've looked at this, the list price is $10 a month. If you're just getting into it, and maybe your leadership, you've looked at it and they think it's $10 a month, look around at what consortia your institution belongs to, because Microsoft loves to make deals. They love to make things available to educational institutions. So so it's like $25 a year or something, 25, $30 a year per person. It's great. That's what we do. So yeah, we're a small shop. If you guys remember 2020, I told you I started in January. So we were in a pandemic 2 months later, right? 3 months later. And what was great is how everything in Power, I got into Power BI like in May or something. And all these user groups, all these communities were meeting online, like we are today, right? It was just such a phenomenal springboard to try and get things done, to get things accomplished. I want to shout out to our local Dallas-Fort Worth user group, which is phenomenal. That's where every week, I get stuff from. It's fantastic that Power BI, that's what Power BI has, I would say, over any other platform, over Tableau or anything else. The size of the community, the vibrancy of the community is phenomenal. So anyway, I got in a situation where I was making some reports, and again, I'm sharing them out with the various parties, and they would say, well, how do I get to the report? So that's all I want to talk about is how we decided in our situation, it makes sense to provide access to the reports. So I would say, oh, well, go to Office 365 and go find the Power BI app, and it'll be under shared with me. If you go to browse, there's a shared with me tab. You could favorite it, all that. That only gets you so far. So what we realized is we needed to create separate groups because different parties had access to different things. So if I could make a web page with the links, but I'm going to have a separate page for the leadership team and a separate page for the deans and a separate page for department chair. And it's just that's difficult, right? So I just wanted to really quickly show you 2 workspaces and the apps. Let's see if I can use the Zoom it thing. And I want to show you these 2 workspaces. So the one on the bottom is our senior leadership team. This is our vice presidents and president. And this one is a larger group. It's all department chairs, program directors, and academic deans. So if you've just started, and I'm kind of imagining maybe some of you are where I was back in 2020, like you're just starting, you're just making reports. So the different groups, they need different access to things, right? So here, in this group, it's just a list of people, right? And notably, I do have the test user here, right? So that was, look, we didn't even have, like, just getting that and getting a license assigned for that was like monumental, getting that approved. But I needed that, otherwise I can't test my stuff, right? So in this workspace, we have a bunch of reports, none of which, well, let me show you the data sets, none of which are refreshing. These are only things that are statically, like they're frozen file based. These things do not update. Everything for the is like this, right? So there's no refresh on any of these things. So to make these available in a more intuitive, well, this is the other thing, I want to go to my user group. I did not know, you have these buttons on the left. And again, if you're new and you see stuff here and it's like, you don't know what all these things are. And I'll tell you, I had seen apps here, but I'm just like, I don't need an app. What do I need an app for? And then we had a presentation at one of our user groups from Shabnam Watson, and she just explained what it was. And then that was like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I need. They're not apps. They're just menus. It's just a menu. That is the one thing I would want you to take away from this, is that this is a way for you to make menus. So it just makes a nice, clean menu for the reports. So then I can share this out, and they can access whatever whatever they need to access, whatever we decided to provide. I say we, it's just me, right? Whatever I'm providing. So one just tip that is, I mean, I'll tell you, watch Shabnam's presentation is I think a great way to get exposed to it. But you want to have your first report be something static, like a splash page or a dummy, because if you make your first report like the fall census, then when 2024 comes, people will bookmark it. You'll tell people to bookmark it. But if this is the first report, then when their bookmark will break, because we'll take this out, we'll put in 24, it won't work. So you want to put in something that's not going to change. Okay, so then the other thing, I'll just real quick show the other one, just to make a point about security. So this workspace, I said there's 40 or 50 people. They're in this. This is not this is an email distribution list. You see, it's ACAD chairs direct. It's an email distribution list. There's all these different mechanisms for groups of people and how they can get access to stuff. This turns out to work really well in our situation, and everybody's in a different situation. In our situation, this worked really well, because as people roll on and off, like someone goes on sabbatical, somebody else rolls on, somebody in another office is taking care of that. They're pulling people on and off this list. So then the access gets automatically governed. The thing that's not automatic is that the Power BI Pro license needs to be reassigned to the new person. That part somebody still has to chase. But at least this part's done. Because before this, I literally would have to go in and like remove people and add people every time a chair changes. That's you can't get as much done if you're spending your time doing those sorts of things, right? So anyway, and again, this one has an app as well. So sorry if I'm in this workspace, and I'll show. Oh, no, I'm not in this workspace. Now I'm in this workspace. So this is it's the same idea. So in here, there's a bunch of reports, the data sets. Some of them update daily, some of them don't. And then most of the reports are available in the app. The one difference, or two differences maybe in this app, I'll just jump over to this here. Instead of organizing it thematically, we organized it by things that have row level security and things that don't have row level security, right? Like it's not great. I'm not that pleased with it, but I don't want people to get confused about what they're seeing and what they're not seeing. So like all of this stuff would be everybody sees the same thing. Down here, each department chair only sees the stuff that their department has access to. The only other thing I'd point to is, your splash page can be dynamic. I don't want to email people every time I update something, every time. So I just have a stupid spreadsheet in SharePoint. It has like a date, a comment, and how many days do I want this to stick? So on October 10th, I put a comment. I said, leave it on, I don't know, 21, 30 days. And this is just an easy way for me to communicate as people go to the splash page, what's working, what's not. So I would say, again, that the major point that I just wanted to make is that if you are just getting into this and you've been shying away from apps, Microsoft is not famous for naming things well. So it's not an app, it's a menu. It's really easy to use. You get one per workspace, and you can do more sophisticated things, but what I just showed you is sort of the relatively simple. So thank you. That's what I got, Pete.
Thanks, Amin. That was awesome. I agree. Apps are not very well named, but they're a really powerful tool in Power BI, and one that we didn't use very often at first either. But one of the great things about apps is, you do have the ability to curate content for different audiences. You can set permissions to different reports for different groups inside of an app. So a bunch of groups can have access to the same app, but they might have different permissions inside the app. And that helps you basically distribute a set of reports to a large audience or multiple audiences without having to create copies of different reports that have different features in them. So apps are great. And you can also you can set apps to automatically install. When a person logs into powerbi.com for the first time, they go in, if there's a brand new app and they're part of the audience, it'll automatically install in their Power BI environment, so they can just go in and start looking at it. And I think it's a pretty good way to distribute content to a lot of people. Going through questions, Amin, we've got a question to be able to, could you link the YouTube video that you, there, all right, got it. You're on top of it. I don't even need to say anything.
Let me just caveat, Pete. I actually didn't watch that video. I just Googled her name and Power BI apps audiences. So I figured that's the same presentation she gave to our user group.
All right,
but that's my one caveat.
Fair enough. Jeff said, +1 to using apps much better than creating different workspaces with similar content to go around report permissions. Yeah, absolutely. We're starting to move away from giving users direct access to workspaces and instead give developers access to workspaces, but give end users access to the apps. So to be clear, there's all of your Power BI content is hosted in a workspace, and each workspace can have at most one Power BI app connected to it. So you can give your developers access to the workspace and then give your end users access to the app. And that's how you can sort of segment the roles a little bit, keep things a little more secure, and distribute content, as I mentioned earlier, to big audiences with minimal effort. We are pretty much at time. It's 2:23. Technically, we're scheduled to go to 2:30, but I don't want to push it. We've covered a lot of content today, from the pretty technical stuff, talking about direct query and SQL Server views and kind of the overall ecosystem with Power BI Report Server and the service and Pro versus Premium. We're still just barely scraping the surface there, and it probably opens up just a Pandora's box of questions that people probably have. So what I will say is, if you do have questions or suggestions or topics that you'd like to cover in upcoming monthly meetings that might have been generated from this meeting, stay glued to your email inbox. I am going to send out a message, hopefully in the next 24 hours, with a bunch of links coming out of today's meeting. And please submit your ideas to me. If you submit an idea for a topic, I might come back to you and try to elaborate on that. Or if you want to volunteer to speak, reach out to me and you and I can coordinate on getting you on board as a speaker on one of these topics. Would love to get more people involved. Thank you so much to everyone for your time. Thanks so much for our speakers, Jeff, Teresa, Doug, and Amin. You all were wonderful. Look forward to hopefully working with you again soon in the future. And I hope that everyone has an amazing rest of your day, and good luck out there.